Welcome to the Alapra Podcast, the home for cultural chit-chat in and outside Madrid. People will talk. Welcome to the Alapra Podcast. This is Andy. Indy. Well, I was just distracted by you hitting your elbow off the table.
Andy.
Hindi.
And I'm ready. I know I am ready.
Yes, you are ready. So well done. You hit your elbow, not your head. So your short-term memory should be okay.
My funny bone.
Funny bone, and nobody's laughing. So you're welcome. Welcome back to the podcast. You've been missing in the last.
I never left.
I did an episode without you.
Yes, but because you're a traitor.
Well, you have brought news of podcast tidings. Radio Public.
Oh, yes.
Yes, so
that's it.
Fill us in. You were the fixer, the finagler on this.
Radio Public, yes. Yeah. Yes, we were. Well, it's one of the platforms that our podcast is on, and it's definitely the one that you should listen on.
Listen to.
No, listen to our podcast on.
Also, they should listen to the podcast with your voice a little bit higher.
I can't speak any louder. I can't breathe.
Okay.
Thanks, Poland.
Thanks who?
Poland.
Okay.
No, Poland.
So basically, you can find us on Stitcher, iHeart, Audio Boom, and lots of other podcast platforms. I'm just recapping. That's what you do sometimes. But more importantly, if you listen to us on Radio Public, you will help finance or support us. And also, very often, well, not very often, but maybe at the start or end of the show, you will hear an advert from them. No? Yeah. Yes. That's okay, good. Is that supposed to be secret?
No, it's just like you explained it really badly.
How have I explained it really badly? They're going to put an advert at the start, at the end of the show, and at the end of the show, right? That I've said that, and that's what's happening.
Yes, but they already know that because they've just listened to the advert.
No, they haven't, have they? Because we haven't set up. Have we set up the advert?
Yes.
Well, I didn't know. Okay, can you come back to the microphone, please?
Start this again.
Jesus.
Start again.
No, we're not. This is staying in because it's Monday. You have parking considerations, and we're pressed for time as per usual. So
okay.
This has been wonderful. But it's good though because that was a bit of a car crash again. But anything else before part 2?
No, I think that's about it.
Okay, so I think we need some time to recuperate. You go to that corner, I'll go to my corner, and we'll think about what we've done in part 1 of the podcast.
In part 1.
Welcome to part 2 of the show, Mary. How are you going? How are you doing?
I'm going very well.
Mixture of how you're doing and how you're going. So lots of things that we can talk about now. I mentioned to you off air, I've received a book from a fellow Leonesa about Leon. It's like a memoir of a childhood directly after the Civil War. I haven't read it yet, but it seems like it's going to be an interesting read. Very much in the style maybe of like Frank McCourt's Anches, Ashes and Tis. Those kind of like tough childhoods, but we were poor but happy kind of thing. But very interesting for the story that's in it. You're from Leon, and we spoke about politics before in the Civil War, specifically Madrid, and then touch on other regions. So obviously, as I said, we're going to discuss it more after I finish reading it. But is there much of a Civil War memory in Leon? Are you familiar with this particular memoir or other similar stories of people who grew up in the post-Civil War period in the northern Spanish city?
I think it would be very different depending on whether we're talking about the villages or we're talking about the cities.
Well, this guy, yeah, is from the village, yeah. So
yeah, I mean, I think in the villages, like, life was already quite hard because the industrial revolution and everything was just, we had it a lot later than everybody else, so it was just,
yeah.
So the conditions were really, really tough, and there were some very poor areas. Yes.
No, I was just gonna say, one of my students, he reminisces about this time a lot. He's not actually from Leon, but he mentions that the villages were almost like medieval in how cut off they were and how underdeveloped they were. And he went on to talk about the dams being built by Franco because of the water shortages and the famines and these things, and how it.
This reminds me of my dad because he always mentions the dams as well.
Oh really? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he wasn't saying it in praise of him. He was just saying like that he had to do it because the country was basically in a very dire situation. Did the dams provoke things in the villages that basically improvements?
Well, I think like public works are one of the main characteristics of dictatorships in general. Like, they always do that, like roads and dams and things like that, because they're seen as progress and they're a way of keeping people happy.
No, that's definitely true. But I think in the case of the dams, though, I mean, they actually did. Again, it's not like an apology for the regime or anything, but he had to respond because it was. I mean, it was so bad, no, the kind of crisis and shortage of food and basic necessities.
Yeah, but I mean, like, it crossed those places to start with, so like, it they well. There was when obviously things happen on either side, but he went a long way to crush areas that were
Oh no, I know that.
supported of the
No, I
other
know that.
side.
I know that completely. Again, as I said, it's not an apology because like it wasn't out of the goodness of his heart. It was definitely a political necessity to because dictatorships obviously rule with an iron fist, but things can at the same time go so bad that you have to give somebody or people something to hold on to, or some kind of small sliver of a stake in society. If it's all gone to pot and there's absolutely no food, then like whatever questionable legitimacy that dictatorship has is going to be gone out the window anyway, because people will feel like they have nothing to lose anyway. So I think just even to maintain this authoritarian regime, it was probably in his very political interest to kind of recover what he had helped destroy in the first place. No.
Yeah, it's all propaganda.
Yeah. But yeah, so we're talking specifically about Leon though. So okay, apart from the fact that perhaps it might have lifted the area a little bit, like the villages themselves were desperately poor. Um, were they affected, do you think, by the Civil War? Because sometimes you have rural communities that perhaps are bypassed by kind of big nationalist or national events. Would they have seen a lot of frontline things in Leonese villages? It's difficult to say, no?
Well, I mean, I think like war reached everywhere because, for example, my grandmother, she was from a village in Avila and it was very small, and in the village, everybody knew whose side each person supported, and
Yeah.
there were like frequent like fights there, even before the war. So
Yeah.
everybody like knew each other, and also I remember my grandma always saying that a lot of people kind of like took advantage of the situation to like denounce, and it was all a system of like denouncing other people for being
Yeah.
traitors or whatever. And a lot of people, some people, it was because of their political ideas, other people was because they had like personal feuds that they wanted to resolve in that way, so
Yeah,
they just
it's a very common story happening in the Irish Civil War as well.
yeah, I think it's quite
I mean,
common.
it's basically this the basis of the crucible that great American play, and even we reviewed in an earlier podcast episode 2 years ago a book by Frank McDonough called The Gestapo, or Gestapo without the definite article, and again it's a catalogue of people just denouncing each other for
Yeah.
petty rivalries and for non-political
Yeah.
reasons. So the human story, basically, which is common to a
Yeah,
lot
the
of
human story,
yeah.
like, and also, well, because it was a civil war, then even within the families, there were like
Yeah.
people supported different bands and so on.
Yeah. No, I was curious to know because like in Ireland, there's definitely a lot of evidence of like the villages being the cradle of a lot of well, you said bands like groups or fighting forces, volunteer forces in the Irish War of Independence. So. And there's a lot of books written, like for example, the Kerry fighting story, the Limerick fighting story, the Munster fighting story, where you'll see a
Yeah.
lot of examples of villages playing.
I don't think Leon is a place you particularly mention because the
Yeah,
city itself, or yes, the city itself was supported the national band, supported Franco's band.
yeah,
So of course, like people in mining areas and so on, well, there was a huge resistance in Asturias, for example, linked to like anarchists and so on, and they were linked to like mining towns,
yeah,
and of course those towns are also part of Leon.
yeah,
So that's what I meant. That is very different from like, the mining areas that are more linked to Asturias and to resistance than the town itself.
yeah. Well, it's the same in Ireland as well. Again, and lots of conflicts where you have focus anyway. No, naturally, apart for different reasons, but for one reason or another, you have towns that aren't really directly involved. Because I'm talking about Ireland now, but you can definitely, if you had to paint a map of the country that was involved in skirmishes and sustained conflict against the British government, like the southwest of Ireland, Munster, Dublin, kind of west coast as well. But other areas that wouldn't have been such a flashpoint for the conflict. So,
I mean, for this is complicated
yeah,
because on one side you have, you know, Catholicism in a way, conservative ideas and so on, which sometimes can happen in small places.
yeah,
But also on the other side, you have things to do with the defense of the workers and
socialism.
support for like agriculture and so on, which is also another aspect of small places and of the
That's very
countryside.
true. Yeah.
So it's that's what I mean, that I find it complicated to. Of course, I'm no expert at all, but we have certain cities that are very obvious, like strongholds of one band or the other.
One group or
Um,
the other. No.
yeah.
Okay.
um,
Yeah, but of course, it's yeah. I understand what you mean completely, and we'll find out anyway more of the story once I read it. I flicked through it, of course, and typical stories of like when I went to the No Pasaran exhibition, people just being dead tired, literally dead. Well, not literally dead tired, but exhausted, and how they'd fallen on their feet because they were so exhausted from moving around or from the constant fear. So again, like another of these kind of common human stories, and also as well, going back to Laurie Lee, who's very famous in this podcast, but kind of like talking, but it's also like about a childhood in a rural place where you didn't have enough money. So from the impression I get from flicking through it, another one of those kind of as well, rural childhood memoirs where the apples were on the trees, and you play around in the orchard and all that kind of stuff. So I think there's going to be elements of that as well. So it's going to be a mixture of a Civil War memoir, extreme poverty, but also kind of this kind of lost not pre-industrial maybe, but kind of like in Laurie Lee, it's a lost England now, and maybe like a lost Spain. It's kind of pastoral, rural scene. It's going to be a mixture of all
yeah.
these different narrative threads, I think.
Well,
But
I think some of the towns were actually, like, for example, my father didn't live in a village, he lived in a town.
yeah,
But he always tells me when he was little that they used to eat like leaves of certain trees, and
yeah,
um, when they were very little because there was no food. So yeah, I think everything, of course, was in a smaller scale because even like the cities that now are really big. I mean, Spain like has grown like hugely.
I think when we were
During,
researching Lola Flores, no,
yeah.
that Madrid already had 1 million inhabitants during the Civil War, I think.
Oh yeah, or
Yeah,
yeah,
so
eight
it's
hundred thousand something like
and now
that. Yeah.
like the community that has like 5 million, the city maybe has 3 or 4. So it's like tripled or quadrupled in the intervening years.
Yeah.
So yeah, so and also as well, it's complicated because I think these kind of memoirs are useful because a lot of people that were involved directly either during the Civil War or kind of grew up in the post Civil War period, And like it's documented because we did another podcast about this when we looked at photographs of kids around Spain where
Yeah.
they're growing up in this very poor context. But again, a lot of people involved don't necessarily talk about it. It's the same in Ireland as well,
No,
with poverty or the Irish War of Independence. Some great stories to be told, but unfortunately they've been kind of kept
yeah.
under lock and key. Yes.
It was quite interesting because do you remember like a month ago or so I showed you a picture of people queuing in Chamberí where my family used to live, where my grandma used to live when she moved to Madrid, and they were queuing to see like a little theater, like
Yeah.
puppets.
Yeah.
And that was like 1946, which was like the year after. Sorry, 1940, which was the year after the Spanish Civil War finished.
Well,
And it was very striking for me because at one point I thought one of the women looked very much like my grandma, and I showed my mom even, and then I thought, well, there's no way she would have been queuing to see something like that. And then I found this because of the fact that you had to pay, it
yeah.
said, I can't remember how much it said it was, but probably wasn't very much. But it was kind of like a contrast because then it made me think that just as any other conflict, some people don't even like notice that things are going on.
That's very true, but also as well, when we're researching for the audio guides in the Barrio tour, they were mentioning that the city was, because the Civil War had been kind of won mostly, but Madrid was still holding out for a few years, and within that city, they're trying to maintain a semblance of normality by going to work and having cinemas and theatre productions as well. So because those kind of artifices were already in place during the Civil War, I guess it was easy to keep them going afterwards. But I think you're definitely right though that for people there are always people unaffected by the wider events because they've either money or influence or probably both. So, but speaking of books in the Civil War, you've given me two books recently, two interesting ones. One is by an Irish, well, both by Irish writers actually. One about Rayo Vallecano called Working Class Heroes. Robbie Dunn is the name of that guy, and he works for AS as a sports journalist. I used to write for Marca, so the competition. And he's written an interesting book. I haven't finished it yet, but I've only gotten it like last week. But making swift progress through it, I've discovered some interesting things about Vallecas. That used to be called like Avenida Albufera, which is like the main thoroughfare in Vallecas. Used to be called like Avenida Generalissimo or something.
Yeah, there was also Castellana.
Well, yeah, but Castellana makes but Castellana makes more sense, and even Gran Via was called that as well. Had a fascist name, but I didn't know that the stadium of Rayo Vallecano, which is still there in Portazgo, was an internment camp after the Civil War ended. So Republican prisoners were held there for a number of years by Franco's government. It's kind of striking because it's such a working class and leftist community. One wonders if he was trying to. Well, a stadium's a natural place anyway to intern people, but I wonder if there was an attempt to kind of fascistize the barrio. Facha, if you're not familiar, is a Spanish term which basically means fascist, no, or very right wing.
Yeah, quite, yeah.
Basically fascist, no.
Well, yes, there's a lot of argument about that, but that's a generic term, to refer to by comparison with Italy.
Yeah, we saw a Facha today.
Oh yeah, I was a bit scared.
Biker pulled up on a chopper, big cigar in his mouth, and then like one of those Nazi helmets and the cross that you associate with Nazi Germany on the side of the helmet as well. Robbie Dunn as well in the book, he makes the point that like he's never like until he moved to Spain he had never really heard the word fascist being bandied about so much, and that's something that struck me as well. Either like written down as graffiti or shouted on the street. So that's definitely an experience we've both shared, me and the erstwhile Robbie. But no,
it's over an evolution, the term.
Yeah, no, it's a great book though because like he talks like because basically it is the last of the barrio clubs, and like San Pauli would be the German equivalent, but they have like a shop in New York where they sell their stuff, so it kind of goes against their socialist principles. But there's so many famous stories, and a lot of these I know myself anyway. But like it's socialism in action where people really do feel it's their duty to help out their neighbor. And it's not just platitudes; these are real stories. The famous example: the woman almost kicked out of her house, and then the club swooped in to kind of pay for the house. Because I mean, literally, there was a human chain around the apartment block, and the police were coming in to evict her. Number of evictions in Spain being criminally high as well. during the crisis, particularly. But also like other examples, like how they've named one of the stands after a Nigerian footballer who you could see in the local supermarket buying 10 pairs of shoes for his family back home, and how like he worked as a baggage handler after playing for Rayo Vallecano, and another guy like who played 2 games for Rayo and then like went to the north of Spain or the part of Spain where they not the north of Spain obviously, but he went to the part of Spain where they filmed spaghetti westerns, and he was actually and Anna Maria, and he was actually in Once Upon a Time in the West with Clint Eastwood.
Oh, really?
When like Sergio Leone's like classic westerns, of which he has many, of course, but that would be maybe one of the most famous as well. So like all these interesting stories, like and of a team and a club that really are in it for the community. Because like I'm not sure I can't remember if we mentioned that in another podcast, but there's that Eamon Dunphy book, which is um, uh, only a game question mark, which is basically about like how this humble footballer who knew he was a humble footballer like every week would play 90 minutes as a self-actualization moments. He would live and die in those 90 minutes to kind of for beliefs that are higher than him, for the club, for his teammates, for the idea of the honest pro being not the skillful one but the dedicated professional. And that's what it is like for the club as well, because they don't care if they're in the Premier Division, or they don't care if they're like playing Real Madrid every week. They just want to have a club that they can be proud of, and that represent them. Again, it sounds like idyllic and nirvana, like, but it is a club though that does really embody really core values like that. But going back to the socialism and the Civil War as well, it goes through the history of Vallecas as well, which is pretty fascinating because he shows about how like even at the turn of the 19th century, sorry, 1900s, so the 20th century, they'd like have collectives and libraries trying to educate each other and make sure knowledge was strong, because they were getting nothing from the government. And even in the 60s and 70s, there's accounts of like, no money being invested, no street lights because the government wants to save money. And Vallecas was definitely like the run to the litter basically, and wasn't given much in the way of resources. So there's always been this kind of spirit of collectivism and socialism and being together. And again, if you're not really familiar with the story or the club, it can sound too good to be true. But again, I can't emphasize enough. This club really do live the principles that they espouse. So and that's very rare as well, where those two go hand in hand. So they are a magical club in their own way. So more of that story to follow as well. But you've also given me another book by another Irish guy who edited it. He's a poet. It's like 11 poems for 11 footballers. Do you 11 poems about 11 topics connected to football?
11 poems about football.
Exactly. Thank you. I was caught. Summing up. Yeah, summing up. Sweeping in there. So why did you pick that particular book, and have you flicked through the poems? Okay, I'm Irish. I like football. I like poetry. It's the magic trinity. So did you flick through any of the poems?
I did. Yes, and I thought it was quite nice because. Some of the poems refer, for example, to like street football.
Yeah.
So the aspect of like playing the street when you were little, and others refer to like professional football, and others just I don't know. Some of them it reminded me of some of them reminded me of a painting that.
From the northeast, the stick figures, no, going to the.
The Lowry? No, I didn't mean that. I meant, I don't know, I think it's like one artist that we follow, and it was a scene of like kids playing in the streets.
I remember that, yeah. There's some great lines in there. The one that the editor has actually written himself, which is the last poem, is he talks about like being in North Carolina and playing football, and he talks about like pot-bellied tricksters and, kind of middle-aged, overweight men playing football and still being a kid somewhere. There's also a great one by a woman from Northern Ireland, I imagine, because she's from Belfast. But based in the poem, But she writes a paean to George Best, saying how he kind of personified the two sides of the city, in its extreme goodness and extreme badness. Obviously, for Belfast the city, lots of problems with more or less the Civil War as well, to be fair. And also in its good moments, the people, the humour, those kind of things. George Best having his demons in terms of alcohol, but also his flurries, his expression, his moment of wit, creativity, his spontaneity, with the ball at his feet. kind of showing Belfast.
That was very posh, Belfast.
Belfast at its best. And I think it's kind of quite an intriguing poem to write about. I guess as well you can say that about Maradona now, because Maradona is making headlines for being an absolute mess.
God, yeah.
But like, he's a humble footballer who came from nothing, and also has his demons, but at his best is a wonderful example of a footballer, and a street footballer, and playing football in a, and it sounds very vague and bullshitty, but in a pure sense as well, just like improvisation, spontaneity, and also representing something which is like the poor community, his family, and at the height of the Falklands War, representing Argentina against from his perspective, I guess, imperialist forces. So you don't always have to agree with him, but at his high moments, he's been more than just a footballer. He's been transcendent, and also in his falls, all too human, just like George Best as well. So, so people always sometimes ask, what's the big deal about football? But it is, again, the human story to connect all the little threads of this part of the podcast. So those 3 books that we've mentioned. So that's been part 2. Thank you very much for listening, and you can join us momentarily in part
3.
And again?
3.
Louder?
3.
Not louder. This is part 3 of the show. Thank you for tuning in and staying with us thus far. You can find us on larpamedia.com, which is our website, larpa1 on Twitter, larpa media on YouTube, and larpa on Instagram. We're basically everywhere. And what's coming up next after the end of this show?
Yeah, sure, that's great for Radio Public.
Exactly, and we should mention that you can listen to it for free, without registration. It's very easy to use and set up. Anything else?
Nothing else.
That's all. Yeah, it's just very convenient, and give it a go and listen to us on that platform as well. So thank you very much again for tuning in, and you can find us on next week's enthralling episode of the El Arpa Media podcast.
Bye.
Ciao. The El Arpa Podcast, the home for cultural chit-chat in and outside Madrid. People will talk.